So let's talk about the cards that were the most underrated by both the community and myself from Alterac Valley. As I do every expansion, I've taken the cards that had really low community sentiment, like around 2 stars effectively, and compared that to their actual play rates. So cards that were rated really low but have significantly higher play rates are going to be deemed the most underrated. And to be honest, there weren't as many this time around, actually. There are still going to be quite a few overrated cards for a future video, but there weren't too many cards that slipped under people's radars, essentially. And some of the ones in this video only kind of barely met my thresholds for being considered like substantially underrated. That said, let's go ahead and talk about the ones that did meet those thresholds, starting off with this guy, the humongous owl. So yeah, our buddy the owl here was rated 119th out of 135 cards by the community, which is crazy, with an average score of 2.3. Now, keep in mind, community ratings don't really go below 2 just because of the way averages work across thousands of people. So I've also included a tiny adjusted score there, where if you normalize this from a 1 to 5 scale instead of really a 2 to 5 scale, which is where most community rankings land, then this would be the equivalent of a 1.53 star rating. And you can see it's like in the bottom 16 cards. People thought Owl was going to be pretty terrible, slow, and awkward. But of course, in reality, we all know the truth of Owl, that Owl OTK has been really the most popular and prominent new deck out of Alterac Valley, played a ton, a horror of the meta. And that made Owl the 7th most popular card in Alterac Valley, and that's in 11.5% of all decks. So Owl Warlock was so popular that it was over 10%, even though it was only one deck from one class. Now, for me personally, I gave both Owl and Phylactery 3 stars. I thought they had like some kind of fringe potential, both independently and maybe together. I did not obviously think they were both going to be 5-star cards that are like the meta-defining pieces of a deck. So I gave this a little more nod than the community on average, but still drastically underrated Owl's potential to completely shake up the meta in pair with Phylactery. So yeah, we all missed the mark on Owl. Turns out that combo was just so powerful, and really kind of the support pieces for Warlock around it, the excessive card draw, the crazy card discounts off Rod, and the like crazy healing are what made this combo possible. And that's why we're seeing nerfs to all of those components, while Owl and Phylactery remain the same, to hopefully kind of pull down the power spikes and speed of this deck a little bit. I should also note, I'm doing this video technically after the nerfs and buffs hit yesterday, but these stats are all from pre-nerf and buff. I wanted to capture, both in this video and the next one, the meta as it existed kind of based on our initial ratings. So I got these stats thankfully this weekend before the nerfs and buffs hit, so we can still look at kind of the original raw numbers for these cards before, say, like, you know, Owl Warlock loses some steam with the nerfs to Rod and so on. Moving on here to Ram Commander. This one was ranked 114th overall, so still very near the bottom. That's a raw rating of 2.5 stars, which you can see even 2.5 stars is still bottom 20 almost for cards. That's a 1.79 star rating if you normalize it. And in reality, Ram Commander is a top 30 card, 29th overall for Alterac Valley, in a total of 4.2% of all decks. That is namely in hand buff Paladin lists. We're getting the 2 Rams in hand, gives you extra fuel for your hand buff things like, say, Alliance Bannerman, and then you've got some nice rushing minions. Outside of that, Ram Commander's getting just a tiny bit of experimentation here and there, but not really any meaningful play. And I gave Ram Commander only 2 stars. I did not think there would be enough upside on these Rams. There are other ways to generate rushers in hand that we've seen in the past that work really well, like Bumper Car and Warrior. I didn't think a deck would really extract enough value out of these Rams specifically. Turns out Ram Commander just barely got over that threshold for hand buff Paladin. Still don't think it's really the best card in that list, but still a good card in a very good list means we underrated it really drastically. This is really more like 3.5 to almost 4-star card, one would say. Now, I don't know if Rank Commander's ever going to go beyond that. I don't see a bright future for this card because I think it has really specific conditions to be met, but it doesn't really matter. It's already exceeded those thresholds and is therefore already underrated. All right, so moving on here to Reconnaissance for Rogue. This one was 95th overall for the community, so a bottom 40 card essentially. But in reality, it's a top 16 card for the expansion. So actually getting played a lot. It's in 50% of Rogue decks right now on ladder. I only gave this one 2 stars. I didn't think Reconnaissance would get there. I thought like, just kind of a random death rattle is not really going to be all that synergistic or important. I didn't think Burgle Rogue decks are actually going to be, a viable sort of strategy. And they aren't in the way I envisioned them, but they are because of the Tempo Burgle package with Knoll and Double Agent. When you've got that with Reconnaissance and some secret stuff, you've actually got this Secret Thief Rogue, or I call it like a Burgle Tempo Rogue, that's a good deck and making up a large portion of Rogue's popularity on ladder. So that's why this is in 50% of Rogue decks. And for that deck, it becomes really nice fuel. And it also turns out when you do sort Death Rattles, specifically filter them to class Death Rattles, the average increases pretty substantially. I've had like 47 Lord Barovs played against me off of Reconnaissance, but there are other just really good solid minions that kind of work independently. I was fearful that with a card like this, you'd get some random stuff that wasn't especially synergistic, but sometimes Death Rattle cards are just good on their own right. And with Reconnaissance both fueling that Burgle Tempo package and then also just generating great cards on its own, that's a combination that makes this card actually really good. This looks like a solid 4-star card, certainly exceeding my 2 stars and the community's 2.29 normalized rating. All right, next up here, we've got Barren Glacier. This one also came in at 2.9 stars, as did our next card. Again, landing it at the 95th spot in that tie. Barren Glacier in reality is played as the 22nd overall most popular card from Alterac Valley, obviously featuring in some Frost Shamans. That's 30% of Shaman decks running Barren Glacier, and that actually seemed a little low to me, but there's just a handful of different ways to slice Shaman right now. You've got Yashiraj OTK. Actually got some Frost Shamans not running Barren Glacier with a faster curve. You still got some Quest Shamans lingering around as well, and some like elemental stuff that doesn't run Barren Glacier. So despite being, a very prominent part of one of the most popular new archetypes, that number's a little lower than you might expect. I also only gave Barren Glacier 2 stars. I liked the rest of the Frost Shaman package a lot. Like, I thought Wind Chill was going to be insane, and I gave 5 stars to the Snowfall dude that 5 just got nerfed. And a Sleepbreaker I thought was going to be insane. I thought Barren Glacier might come in a little slow, though, at 7 mana as a board builder. And although there are some decks that have come to that same conclusion by cutting Glacier, he's still obviously a really strong play, and often just enough of that like final oomph to get decks like that over the hump, where you've already developed threats multiple turns, you had your Cavern summoning 3/4s, you got the big 5-drop guy, and then Glacier's just like the straw that breaks your opponent's removal back and they can't last. So a great tool to just follow up on all of that pressure that you've developed throughout the course of the game, making Glacier a really solid, I think, 4-star card. Obviously not a 2-star card and not the 95th best card in Alterac Valley. Much, much better than that. So next up here is Rokara the Valorous. And Rokara's had such an interesting history for like community perception. First came out, everybody's like, oh, this is the worst card ever. I hate Rokara, 1 star. This is so boring compared to every other hero card. And it was crazy backlash. And then there was like backlash to the backlash. Like, no, Rokara is actually going to be insane. You guys are all crazy. You know how this pendulum kind of swings back and forth, where everybody just wants to argue with everybody else with the most extreme opinions possible. And, I think it landed somewhere closer to the middle, but still certainly on the negative side. Again, 2.9 stars, 2.29 effective. I gave Rokara 2 stars. I thought one of the least impactful hero cards. Now, here's the thing, right? Like, Rokara obviously hasn't dominated the world of Hearthstone. She's not an amazing hero card by any measure of the best hero cards, but she's pretty okay. Landing as the 44th most played card in Alterac Valley. That's in roughly 1/4 of Warrior decks. The big problem for Rokara right now is that Pirate Warrior is such a good refined game plan that doesn't really need this hero card. Some do run it, for the record, but it's not certainly fundamental to the success of Quest Warrior. That Rokara has certainly fallen a little bit, but still being played on occasion. And I think that's a really good sign for the future of this card, for the record, that when such a well-defined game plan can kind of tolerate her, there's going to be other decks in the future that might actually be happy to run Rokara. So this is by no means a 5-star card. I don't even think it's a 4-star card. It's kind of in that 3.5 spot. I would say this just barely got in on my threshold for like underrated cards. They have to be in the top 50 for me to even consider them. She came in at 44th. So Rokara is really one of the least underrated I've ever put in a video like this. But as a point of discussion, she technically met the metrics. You know, this is a difference from 95th to 44th of 51 ranks. That's substantial, right? She was good enough to make the list. Came in under all the metrics I demanded, but, you know, just barely. So where did you land on Rokara? How do you feel like Rokara stands up against all the other hero cards? Like, by many metrics, you could still probably consider her the worst hero card. I guess Dawn Grasp actually probably takes the bottom spot, but maybe the second worst. But still, in some ways, the reaction was so negative to Rokara that she still seems kind of underrated. I think with potential for more, but still sort of boring. I don't know. There's something about this card that it just underwhelms, even if it overperforms. So here's our final card for this video. As I said, there really weren't that many this time around, and this one's, again, kind of an iffy one. Cheaty Snowbold was rated 84th overall at a 3.0 stars. Now, 3 stars sounds like a pretty solid rating, but again, I remind you that the community kind of has upwardly biased ratings. So that's normalized to 2.42. So substantially under 3 stars if you really try to break it down. But still 84th, as you can see, puts that in the bottom half of all cards. In reality, Cheaty Snowbold was played 26th overall. So notably higher. That's a 58 rank difference there from 26 to 84. And that's in over 1/3 of Shaman decks. Similar story to Barren Glacier. Played in Frost themed decks, and as you can see, even more than Barren Glacier was, because Barren Glacier gets cut from some lists. Turns out Snowbold's an amazing tool to help you clean up boards, can even push for a ton of face damage as well. So this is a really, really good card. Now, I like Snowbold. This is one I actually don't think I underrated at all. I think I got it right on the nose. I thought that damage potential was really cool and had a lot of utility, so luckily I spotted this diamond in the rough, unlike every other card on this list. So yeah, Snowbold certainly has exceeded expectations. I think a few people did see the potential here. That's why this rating's a little higher than some of the other ones, but most people still disregarded this one. I think people probably didn't recognize that the damage stacked. So each subsequent freeze would deal an additional 3 damage. I'm sure if you didn't understand that mechanic, you probably thought this was going to be much worse, because like if you had 3 freezers on board, you might only think this deals 3 damage to face extra as opposed to 9 damage to face extra. Thankfully, we had already encountered that interaction in duels, so I kind of knew that going into the Snowbold, but that might have been a big part of the explanation for why this card had a lower rating than otherwise you might have expected. And there you go. That's it. These are the underrated cards of Alterac Valley. Normally I have like 10 plus good options to include in a video like this. This time around, there really weren't that many differences in this direction. People were much better at predicting the cards that were going to be good. The standout cards really stood out. Not too many things flew under the radar here. That said, still, some certainly noteworthy inclusions, particularly the Owl. That said, I'm curious what cards you got right or wrong on this list, and which other cards you might have underrated or were surprised by. Also, of course, stay tuned tomorrow for the overrated cards of Alterac Valley. There will certainly be more options to discuss in that particular video. That said, thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.